Welcome back. So tonight I have a really awesome guest. It is not only a former student of mine, but now a colleague and associate, Michelle Roisman. She's a licensed clinical social worker who has experience working with children, teenagers, and adults. And she originally grew up here in South Florida, and after a few years in New York, came back recently, right before the pandemic started. And she received her bachelor's in psychology from Emory University and her master's in social work from Columbia University. And since that time, her work has included providing home-based family therapy, as well as working in outpatient clinics with individuals of all ages. Her passion has been working with children and adults who are experiencing stressful life experiences and have traumatic histories. Michelle, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So it's really, like, as we know, people don't know this, but for anybody out there who's listening and watching, Michelle literally lives less than a building or so away from me. And due to our awesome social distancing, we're doing this
Exactly.
via the web. So I'm glad to see you for the first time in a while on face to face. So I want to get started first because people always ask us the question, why did you become a therapist, right? And specifically, why did you pick doing what you're doing? So I love to start off with that story for you.
Sounds good. So, I guess where it started was high school. I volunteered a lot with underprivileged children in different areas, different communities, doing different things, and I realized there was such a need for resources and support. For the whole family, not just the child, and that's where it really began was with the parents. And I ended up majoring in psychology in college and then got my master's in New York City, which you had said. And while I was in New York City, I was working in so many different neighborhoods. I was working in Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, and I just witnessed a lot of different things. And while I was there, I had to go to a lot of training in trauma because the students and the children that I was working with, most of their histories, yes, they had depression, anxiety, but they really had PTSD. And it was really hard to diagnose and to see that from the school's perspective, from their parents' perspective. And it just became my passion, something I really was interested in.
Yeah. So when we talk about trauma, people kind of put it out there as in like, oh, I went through this thing and now I'm traumatized, right? So from your understanding, from your best experiences, from your point of view as an expert therapist, what would you say is your personal definition of trauma? Um, and in what ways does it show up that we might even not consider trauma being trauma?
So one of the biggest resources that I love is called the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And so I'm going to give you their definition and then I'm going to fill in the gaps. So they define traumatic stress as anything physical or emotional that could happen to somebody that could threaten their life, either physically, psychologically, and it could be to someone they love. It doesn't necessarily have to be to them. And so when we think about trauma, we have to think about the reaction to it because it's so subjective. One person could go through something and be totally fine, and the other person could have a significant, psychological change. And a lot of things that people don't realize that come from trauma are, of course, people know the overwhelming sense of terror, the helplessness, the horror, the range of emotional reactions. But a child could just not be sleeping. They could be nauseous. They could have stomach aches, headaches, right? They could just not want to go to school. They could be avoiding anything. And if you ask them what's wrong, they're going to say nothing's wrong. And of course, because they don't want to talk about it. And so it's really hard to, as a parent or even, an educator or a therapist to see that that's what's actually going on because they don't want to bring it up.
So how many kids, right, as we're seeing this, I'm flashing back to my childhood um, and it's right, it's interesting that we all go through stuff. And depending on our story, depending on our culture, depending on our experiences in life, we may not call something what it might be. And and I'm thinking back to all the times in elementary school, middle school, that I wanted to not go to school. My stomach hurt, my head hurt, all those times where they actually were physical symptoms. But it was, in a way, non-diagnosable as a stomach issue or right whatever it was. And it wasn't like there was anything massive going on, but like I'm looking back now hearing this and also from my experiences being a therapist, that sometimes we don't call that stress related trauma,
Right.
right?
that's so important, especially right now, during COVID and this pandemic, right? Nobody's going to look at this and say, "Oh, you have PTSD from this pandemic, and now you're traumatized." But if we look at what trauma really does to a person, how your fear is consistent and it's helpless, and there's hypervigilance and a state of shock that your body gets into from a trauma, the same thing could be happening now for kids everywhere, right? Their cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, gets shooting up, and they cannot calm down. If they're a generally anxious person, then imagine now it's going to be even worse. And so I think it's important to remember that not every event necessarily is a trauma in quotes, but it can be traumatic for somebody.
Yeah. Well, I'm noticing as time goes on, right? Because we're now in the end of July, and about a week ago, because I noticed for myself, and this is one of the things that like people are now starting to ask, like, well, as therapists, how are you? What is your self care and what's your anxiety levels and all that stuff? And I'm being honest that it definitely has its toll on me. And I realized that as I made a commitment a week ago to start meditating consistently every night, I actually have those Muse headphones that we saw, right, that you talked about advertised, and I got it last in February, and I started meditating with that. So I just looked last night after my meditation, what are the actual numbers of what's showing up in the last week to 2 weeks, right? That I really started doing it again consistently last week to the beginning of the pandemic, right? Mid-March. And I can see that my total relaxation function that it shows up on the scores, there on average, it was 70 to 90%. And now my highest score of the last week, even though I feel relaxed and I feel connected to the meditation, it's not getting past 60% on my brain scans, right? And this is a 5, 10, 15-minute meditation, and I'm conscious and aware of what's going on around me. So I know for sure physiologically and neurologically stuff is showing up for me as an adult and as a conscious right person. So I'm wondering like what must kids specifically differently be showing up for now that like if we're not tracking them, what can be these little minute things that could be showing up for them, and how can we start implementing some things that we can do for them as well?
Well, we know, in adolescence, our brain's going through so many different changes, right? We're learning so many different things. We're learning to be independent. We're having relationships with friends, with teachers, with our parents. And part of that, our brain has to increase cell production, right? Our brains are growing, we're doing new things. And we have to give that opportunity to our brain to grow. And to do that, the other parts of our brains stop because they can't all go on at once necessarily. And so, our amygdala, which is the part of our brain that is in charge of our emotions, takes over because while our prefrontal cortex, now I'm getting very specific, is growing, and we know that it doesn't grow until late into our 20s when it's really done maturing, I should say. And so while that's learning how to, be good at decision making, prioritizing, inhibiting certain behaviors, and also doing the behaviors you want to do, our amygdala is what covers our emotions. And so when we go through trauma or any traumatic experience or stress, and our body's having that physiological reaction, our brain can't incorporate it all. And it slows down growth, right? It slows down our brain being able to take in new skills, learn new things. And so it's really important for us to kind of slow down those other emotional processes going on in our brain so that our brain can kind of relax and take a step back. And that's why the meditation for you has been so helpful.
So let's take a back step for a second, because I know we're talking about the amygdala and all this prefrontal cortex stuff. So I'd like to give the listeners who haven't, have any background in studying any of the neurology behind all this stuff, and I'll give a quick 30-second breakdown. So really, there's 3 parts of our brain that are interacting with ourself and the world on a daily basis. And the first one, let's call our neocortex, which is our rational brain. That's the part that's logical. It makes sense. It's part of decision making. It helps us discern between, I know where I am, I know what day it is, I know what time it is, I know what I'm in the mood to eat, right? I like pizza, I don't like whatever, right? That's rational brain. That's neocortex. So that's fully conscious and fully aware. Then we get into our mammalian brain, and our mammalian brain is the part of our brain that has no tracking of time. It's timeless. But that's where our emotions play out. So something that happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, when we think about it again, it triggers that same physiological response in our body, a biochemical response in our body, as if we're back there again. And then if that doesn't feel good or feel safe, that goes into our reptilian brain, which is the fight, flee, and reproduce. Flight, fight, flee, and reproduce. That is our safety part of our brain. And when those three parts of our brain are not working in concert together, or what we call in the neuroemotional technique world incongruence with each other, we create something called a neuroemotional complex, otherwise known as an unresolved stress pattern or a traumatic experience. So what Michelle is explaining is that all of this gets highlighted and experienced in different parts of our brain, and parts of our brain can actually be stunted, right, in experiencing full connection and full connectivity in that experience. So what this is happening is that we can get caused to go and be triggered into a fight or flight scenario, and especially kids are more susceptible if they don't have the ability to process it, to express it emotionally, and that's where we as adults have to come in. Correct?
Definitely. And when the emotional part of our brain is taking over, that's when our flashbacks are going to come up. That's when we're going to have intrusive thoughts about something stressful that's happened. Or, we're going to have a hard time identifying emotions in other people more than even ourselves. And so it's really important to notice it.
Yeah. So let's say we weren't in the middle of this pandemic. Like, what would be some of the, I know before you talked about some general symptomology, and then I want to get more into what's going on right now, but like the common things that you're saying, right? It's a kid with the headache, my stomach hurts, I don't feel well, I don't really want to go to school. Those will be the chronic, most consistent behaviors that you've seen over the years?
So those I would say are more of the somatic symptoms of trauma, right? That, their stomachs really do hurt, their heads really do hurt. It's not necessarily an excuse not to go to school, but because of everything going inside their bodies, it's coming out as pain, and they might not be able to express it with words. But the other things are avoidance of everything that's going to remind them, right? There's a big thing called trauma reminders, and those are anything that can remind us of something stressful that's happened in the past. It can be as simple as walking across the street, if that happens to be a reminder for you. And so everybody's are different. There's no one to say, particularly right now with COVID, and we have all this free time sitting at home, just having empty time, not being scheduled back to back to back the way kids are today, can give a kid more time to just sit and think about some of those reminders. And those can be really anxiety provoking because they don't want them. So they try to avoid thinking about it, yet it's popping up in their face all the time.
So in that space, right, let's call that the rumination space where you're stuck thinking about something and you're right. I'm finding, especially as I'm talking to my clients, especially those younger, those adolescent teenage kids, they're home way more now. So it's not like that typical teenager comes home, shuts the door in their bedroom, is on the phone texting their friend on TikTok, Instagram, social media, playing video games. Now they could be home all day doing that, especially during the summer now that the school year is over. So there's more of that isolation from interaction and engagement. But that rumination, I think that's something that I really would love for you to talk a little bit more about, where there's more time that's not focused or structured. So are you saying that the right amount of structure is going to be helpful, and what's too much structure versus being overstructured, overscheduled?
So, what I've been telling a lot of my clients is that yes, we have all this free time, but we do need structure. We do need a schedule. And sometimes I like to just schedule in downtime. I say, okay, well, if you're doing homework all day, then give yourself an hour break to just chill and relax. And so I think it's a really fine line, and it's hard to find. And each child's different. Each teenager is going to have a different say in this. What is good for them and what's too much, right? Some kids do really well with more structure. Some kids, like me, I was like lie in my bed all day kind of kid. So I think it depends on the kid, and it depends on life circumstances and what they're really going through.
Would you say that there's other predispositions of things that would cause a child to have more struggles, more difficulties with this than just the average, whatever it might be? In other words, we're all going to respond and react differently, especially kids. And you can have kids who maybe don't have any predispositions or anything else going on in their life that still may struggle with this. But are there things that could be precursors, or other things to look out for that could make this time period worse?
Definitely. I think any past history of anything stressful can definitely make this period worse. Like we were saying before, now's the time that they're going to sit and think about it. The other thing is, any past history of any depression, anxiety, OCD, right? Anything that could interfere with their mental health could be a stressor. ADHD, right? If a kid has ADHD and they're sitting home all the time, that's going to be hard for them. So there are so many things. The other thing I'm thinking of is parental stress, right? If the parents are under stress, the kids are going to feel that. And the parents, as hard as it is right now, and everybody's stressed, but it's just to be mindful of it and recognize it.
So, as we don't know when this is all going to end, as we have undetermined facts, where one day we hear one thing, one day we hear another thing. Some parents are ready to send their kids back to school. Some parents don't want to send their kids back to school. Some schools are saying yes, we're open. Some schools saying no, we're not open. That can change any day. Given what's the best ways to navigate the uncertainties, especially around now being a month out from, or less than a month out from school starting again?
I think it's really important to help your children feel safe. However, that works in each particular home, but letting them know that they feel heard, that they can come to you, you're a safe person to talk to, right? And then also holding that judgment yourself. If they tell you something you're not excited about hearing about, one of the things I really hear frequently from kids is they don't want to tell their parent because their parent's not going to let them ever leave the house ever again. And then they don't feel safe to come and talk to you about it. And so I think that's one thing. Another one is to provide some extra attention if that's what they need, right? Not that they're feeling needy, but they might look a little needy right now, and that's okay. But providing that attention, and then the reverse, if they don't want the attention and they don't want you in their room asking them what's wrong, to give them their space. So it could really, go on either spectrum with teens about how they're going to want and what they're going to respond to. And, helping them relax, right? Helping them identify the feelings, right? Most kids and adolescents don't necessarily know the feeling that they're feeling. They just know they don't feel good. And so helping them identify, well, are you angry? Are you feeling shame right now? Are you fearful, right? Like, what are you feeling? And then helping them practice relaxing, practice meditation, like Jason was saying, practice deep breathing, positive imagery, saying positive things to themselves. They're safe right now. They're comfortable. They'll be okay. And, a lot of those little things can go a very long way.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear because like what you're describing about like helping the child identify what they need to identify, sometimes I find is incredibly difficult for the adults or the parents to identify their own needs because they're so busy, right, taking care of whatever they have to take care of, that their own needs aren't met. So it's kind of a reflection of what's going on perhaps in the home, right, on one level is going to show up in another level. So what would be some of the tips, right? So if we're saying this right, for the parents to like maybe schedule times for them to have their own downtime, to leave the house by themselves, if just do something even in a safe way, socially distanced way, to carve out time for themselves would also be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, parents, that's a whole other topic is how to be a parent of a kid with stress and take care of yourself, right? Because you're going to have your own reactions, your own stress about, your child and what they're going through. And so it's important for everybody to take time for themselves. I hear that a lot right now. People don't want to leave their homes. They don't want to do anything. They're just home. And it's really important, even if it's just going for a walk for 10 minutes, if it's taking a deep breath, if it's meditating before bed, little things that you can do to kind of give yourself a break.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, one of the things I'm a big fan of is creating rhythms and rituals in a life. And, the people who I find are the most successful are the ones who actually have a consistent schedule. So they know what's going on. So when things have to fit into their life, they know where it fits in versus it becoming an overpowering obligation or distracting them from their purpose. And I'm wondering what it would look like if going back to that concept of structure versus free time and play, of like even scheduling completely unstructured time, right? Between 3 and 5 is completely unstructured time. Do whatever you want. 5 to 6 would be this, 6 to 7 would be this, and shower time is consistent, and reading time is consistent, and family meditation. I mean, that'll be freaking amazing, right? Um, one of my buddy, one of my buddies, Jim Shields, he was on earlier. He has an incredible book called 18 Summers. They basically have 18 years of opportunity to create long-lasting um, relationships with your family, legacy with your family, and he talks all about tech fasting. That one day a week he commits to not having a tech day with his,
Okay.
right? And I can imagine right now, even more so, what he would say would be, we absolutely we needed it before this, but absolutely, completely right now, as families, if you can commit to 1 day a week without technology, without the news on, whatever channel it is, right? Without being on social media, without checking, right? Anything. Can we have a tech-free day? What that would do.
Yeah. And I think that's so important because a lot, my clients, they frequently say, I'm taking care of myself, I'm watching TV, or I'm playing on my phone and I'm playing a game and it's relaxing. And I have to really help, especially teens, learn the difference between what I call passive and active coping. Passive is when you're sitting on your phone and you're scrolling on TikTok, and then all of a sudden it's 4 hours later and you don't know where the time went, right? I see your face. Versus active is going for a walk, is doing a meditation, is really taking the space to give yourself time to relax and take care of yourself. Going on a bike ride, playing a game with friends, right? Not just watching TV or playing on your phone.
Right, right. And one of the listeners who are in happens to be my mom, so shout out to my mom. Right, that she's a reading specialist, and her thing is she says that visual schedules are so helpful for kids with an anxiety, right? So in other words, to see what's actually happening, to see what's to look forward to, your
Yep.
regularly scheduled programming, that visual cue. Have you seen that, right? And have people that you've worked with, have they implemented something like that where we know Tuesday night it's on the wall, it's not just on the fridge, but
Yeah, definitely. A lot of my clients, especially the ones who are like the high achieving teens that need to get straight A's and they have a lot of anxiety right now, I've been having them write down schedules and lists and things that they know that they need to do, what time they're going to do them and when. But also, I do make sure to have them schedule in leisure time, right? When are they just going to chill? When are they just going to go on a walk? Because those are just as important as getting that A in class. So definitely, I think visual schedules and visual reminders are really important. Sometimes I have kids just write breathe on a sticky note and put it on their mirror, so that when they look in the mirror, they remember, okay, I need to take a deep breath, and it's just a good visual reminder for them.
yeah, so there's something you said that I love because people always talk about, well, I'm just walking or I'm just reading a book as if it's not enough.
Mhm.
As it's like it's a pre-qualifying, it's a pre-qualification of them disqualifying the action of what they're doing that could be self-care or uplifting to them. Well, I just read 10 pages. It's not like it's a big deal. So how do we get them away from the I'm just doing, right? It's just a walk. It's just
Yeah, it's about their mindset, not putting that judgment on themselves that they're not doing more than that, right? Because everybody needs to do what they need to do. Everybody has different ways of coping, and reading a book is an amazing coping skill. And if you take that judgment off of it, it would help with consistency and repetition and allowing yourself to relax. But when you continuously feel that stress about just doing it or just going for a walk, it's not going to help in the same way.
yeah, because I remember at the beginning of the whole pandemic, everybody was like, "That's it. I'm gonna finally write that book. I'm gonna work out every day. I'm gonna have all this game plan. I'm gonna start cooking." And now we're 4 months in, and I don't know how many people have actually accomplished that. I know in certain accountability groups that people are committed to those type of things. But talking about judgment, right? What you just said was like so heavy and so important. Is that like right? Kids just ended school a few weeks, whatever it is, a month ago, and now school again is right around the corner, but the what are we supposed to be accomplishing, the pressure that parents are supposed to accomplish, the pressure that they put on the kids, the pressure that the kids put on themselves, where what do we talk about with that?
Right. I think it's so hard today. The pressure keeps going up and up and up from when anybody was kids previously, right? Every year, the scores get higher, the pressure gets more, and a lot of it is the kids, a lot of it is the parents, and scheduling and trying to find things. And, it's so important to realize what is needed versus what is wanted, right? Do you need to do all of these things? Is it 100% necessary? Or is it something that you would like and you would aspire to and it'd be great? And sometimes just taking that mindset shift can take that pressure off because it's not necessary, it's not needed, it's something with life.
So instant gratification when it comes to doing this, right? I'm not feeling well, I'm stressed out, my kid is right, let's just say, right, I'm the parent who's saying that, or I'm noticing my kid. How patient do we need to be with this process versus like hoping that like some implementation, some intervention, talking to some therapists like what you like us will bring this overnight change when the whole world around us isn't changing. So how do we really guide people to being patient, and how patient should they be?
I think, with anything, it's important to be really patient, especially when it comes to mental health. How many times you included that people they come for one session or two sessions, and they're like, you're not doing anything for me. And therapy or mental health, it takes time. It takes time for that stress to build up, just as it takes time for us to de-stress and bring it back down. And as the world is not changing and it's not going back to the way we'd like it to, and I don't think anybody realized that we wouldn't be going to school in the fall necessarily, that with that is going to take time, right? Kids have to learn to cope. They have to learn to deal with these stressors and these changes that they've never experienced before. So it's important to be really open and honest with them as things are changing, and giving them the prep in advance, not just saying the day before school, oh, you have school tomorrow, but giving them time to kind of adjust and cope with the changes.
Yeah. So the one topic I'm hesitant to discuss, but we have to discuss, is the God forbid loss of life during this sudden, quick. There's a thing that if a child is out, right, the whole debate about whether a child is a carrier, is passing it on. I'm not going to get into that, but as far as just, right, there's possibilities that there's a teacher that they may have that may not be there in the future, God forbid. There might be a family member that may not be there, God forbid, and there may be a friend that may not be there, God forbid, from this. So what do we do? Because this is not like the random story where, the only thing I knew back in the day was like one kid in middle school who really was in my class who something happened to him. Now this is every day in the news with everything, right?
I think, with any stressful situation and loss of life that is traumatic or sudden to somebody you care about, that's a trauma, right? That's something that affects us. And especially now, kids aren't, any family member isn't having the time to cope with it, to prepare for it, to have a funeral, right? All of these things that kind of help us cope and mourn and move on. And so I think it's important to have that patience, like you were saying, to be mindful of how these things are going to affect everybody around us, not just kids, and allow them the space to feel whatever they're feeling. I think that's one of the most important things I tell parents of kids all the time is let them feel it. Don't shut it down, right? Don't make them stop crying. Let them cry. Crying serves a purpose. It's reactive, helps us. And so letting kids and teens feel what they're going to feel and express it.
So as a part of like trauma is the unresolved grief around whatever happened, and not being able to not just express it but also heal from that experience.
Yeah, I think it's that. And I also think it's, the shock value, right? Trauma isn't necessarily when a family member or, a grandparent is slowly dying and needs months to prepare, but it's the parent that dies suddenly in a car crash that just isn't there all of a sudden and they have no time to prep for it. And that's what makes it so traumatic. And so right now, that's happening all over the place. People are dying, unfortunately, and we have no prep time for it. You can't go visit your family in the hospital. There's horrible stories that we've all heard. And so that's what makes it so stressful. That's the hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah, which goes back to the patience part of understanding that this is not a short-term fix, right? Whether what's going on in the world, but being proactive about getting your kids the right help, the right resources, such as working with someone like Michelle, right? This is such an important investment for our well-being, not just for the family's well-being, but for the child's well-being, because stuff can be shoved down for years and years and years and show up 15, 20, 30 years later. I'm working with a client and they're now in their mid 20s, and stuff that happened to them when they were 17 that they're like, oh no, I went to therapy and I dealt with it, is resurfacing again because of something presently going on in their life. So, hopefully part of the therapeutic process is actually finally solving it, putting it to bed, healing from it. But in the world of the stuff that I was doing pre-pandemic when I was with clients was the neuroemotional technique, and we can actually find the trigger and the fight or flight response in the person. So otherwise we're just guessing on an intellectual or rational level that like, oh yeah, no, I'm good with that, right? So if something is still showing up and if something's still being triggered, right, for lack of a better term, then there must be a component or an aspect of that that hasn't fully been handled. And maybe that person wasn't would you say that maybe they either A, weren't ready to go deeper, B, they maybe held something back about sharing their experience as well? Maybe they weren't as forthcoming or as open or
Definitely. And, I think I see a lot that, especially with teenagers, they're like, oh, that didn't affect me. I was 9, it didn't affect me. Now I'm 16. And then when we really talk about it, they realize, and that's when the change happens. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better when they have that realization, but that's when they start to put the pieces together and say, yes, this event did affect me. It might have been small to somebody else, or it might not have been as significant as I see on TV, but it was a big deal. And it's the most important thing that kids can do.
so over the years that you've been doing this, how have you seen when stuff shows up for children? How has it affected for, especially for in the scenarios where parents are together? How has that affected the marital dynamics?
I think it's hard. I think kids don't necessarily want to talk to their parents about what's going on. And I think it creates resentment, it creates, a lack of trust on the parent side, on the kid side. And one of the things that I do is it's called trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. One of the main aspects of it is bringing that connection back together, bringing the whole family in the room together. Once it's safe and, things are able to be processed healthfully, that they can talk about it together and know that when things come up or a kid's re-triggered or have these intrusive thoughts, that their parents a trusted adult that they can go to. And so I think you brought a good point. It usually it's not easy, but healing can happen.
Yeah. Do you see that like parents sometimes will have like any issues that might be already in their relationship, like it would already start triggering more stuff between the couple, like that the kid becomes the scapegoat, right? As we know in family dynamics, a lot of times kids become the scapegoat of the parents' issues. But do you ever see like where if the kid is going through some type of traumatic experience, it starts creating a rift between the parents and their own relationship between the two of them as far as marital stuff?
Definitely, because they're trying to get help with their child, right? And if it's not helping, they're going to take their anger out somewhere. And the easiest person is your significant other to take that anger out on. And so definitely, and even past traumas from parents can come up if they see their kid struggling and these things are coming out. They're going to struggle themselves because they're going to have a reminder of something and realize, oh wait, my childhood wasn't necessarily as great as I thought it was. And so it definitely brings up a lot in everybody.
Yeah, so I know there are right the theories that we talk about is that unfinished business passes on intergenerationally, and our hope is right that our future generation won't have as much unfinished business as it is, but there's still always stuff to work on. So, like you're saying, I very much agree with that. If you're seeing your kid go through something and it's pushing your own buttons, there probably is something there about whatever that experience is for yourself that you still need to work on. And I would definitely say not only, do family therapy, if your kid needs to go to individual therapy, go to do the individual therapy, but that family therapy and then doing that individual therapy for the adult as well will be like, so, asking ourselves, well, what is it about what I'm witnessing that's bothering me so much? Not the fact that I don't like my child suffering, or I don't like getting into fights with my spouse or my partner more, but like, why am I being bothered by that experience? And what is it resembling to what I went through? And what haven't I done the work on about that? So I know that's such a huge, massive, important, especially when it comes to like trauma, because like it is, it's a fight or flight
Mhm.
at the end of the day.
It is. And most people know that, right? Fight or flight. When I bring that up, everyone's like, oh, yeah, you learned that in school. But it's so hard to apply it to yourself. Saying, oh, wait, I'm in fight or flight right now. My body prepared to attack, whatever it is. And that's where a lot of irritability is because their heart rates is racing, right? They're going through so much stress. And that's why they're so irritable with you because they're prepared to fight whatever comes their way.
Yeah. So after this is all, so let's say they're doing the work, they're going to sessions, they're working with their kids working with someone, maybe them as a family. Right. I know that a lot of times that right we've experienced this is that it's the drop off therapy. Take care of my kids, I'll pick them up at the end of the session. So how um, important, right? Would you say like in order for the best, most successful work to be done, that a parent or the family has to commit to being part of that process and not just say, no, 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 this is my kids thing, you fix them. I'll pick them up at the end of this hour, meaning like whatever, I'll let them sign on and by themselves at this point. But like the drop off therapy.
I think, with trauma especially, it's something that the whole family needs to be involved in, because the kid, I could be there with them, or you could be seeing them for an hour once a week, maybe twice a week, but then they're spending the majority of their time at home with their parents. And if their parents aren't embodying some of the messages that the therapist is sending, it's disconnected. They're not going to understand. It's going to be confusing. So the whole family needs to be on the same page with how to handle a situation, how to talk about the situation, how it's going to affect the child or teen. And so it's definitely not a drop off therapy type situation. For the change to happen, that's when the parents are coming in. I've had so many kids and go through serious traumatic things when I was working in New York, but the parent came every single week and they did amazing at the end.
And that definitely expedites the process, probably, right? Because I'm seeing this right now, the case that I'm working with, and there's a college student, and I'm like, listen, like, I can help you to a limit, but I'd rather save you time, effort, and money where I want your family to be involved starting next session. And this was session one, right? That was at the end of session one. I can only commit to you if you commit to this process. And it apps, well, are you sure? I'm absolutely completely sure because you've already done multiple paths of therapy with other therapists, and now you're in my lap, right? So if I'm going to be doing something different, not just being a different personality, and as much as right, I already know that I'm a different personality than the other therapists they work with, but if I'm going to be more efficient and more effective, will you be willing to do this? And they kept coming up with all these different excuses. Well, what about this? Can I try that first? I mean, you could, but haven't you already? Well, no, I haven't tried these things yet. I'm like, what do you think will happen? Well, I'll probably end up back where I am now. How much time do you think that will take you? I don't know, 2, 3 months, but at least I won't have to talk to my family about it. I'm like, but that's the whole reason why, if you want to feel supported, you want to feel engaged, you want to feel important, all the things that are going on, you have to get past that. So I see that like this doesn't just end with adolescents. I would say even for college students, right? Right, high school kids, right, who didn't have a graduation or they didn't have prom. College students who either had to come home early or now had to pivot fully online, especially incoming freshmen, but students who are already away, who are now coming home or stayed on campus and quarantined to not have their families involved. And parents, I really want you to hear this. Like, be engaged. It's a different level. It's not like you're being like, no, I want them to be adults. I want them to learn how to handle this. Doing family therapy with your college age kid is also really important and really essential.
Definitely. I like to think of therapy as not forever. I like to think of it as, something that you need to get through stressful experiences and to gain the skills, but then you take those skills past therapists, right? Like the therapist isn't the one who's doing the work. You're doing the work or your kid's doing the work. And so when we bring the whole family in the room, those parents become that trusted person that they can talk to, that if something else were to happen, let's say, they have the people to trust, they have the support system and the skills. And so it's so important for the family to be there for them to listen.
So if there was a good for all right now, like of, you know, if you can do at least this one thing during this process, whether you're a teenager listening to this, you're a college student listening to this, you're a parent, an educator, right? Anybody who's working with kids, what would be the one thing that you would say, like, this is my good for all right now that I think you absolutely completely need to be doing during this time frame?
I think meditation is one of those things. I think it's a beautiful thing. I utilize it myself too daily, most days. But also, my other thing is the judgment, right? So when we do those things and we have these skills and we maybe don't do them every day, to take that judgment piece away, right? Even as I said, most days I meditate, but there are days when, of course, I don't for whatever reason, and not putting that judgment on myself that I'm not doing enough. And I think right now, everybody is trying the best that they can, doing the best that they can for themselves, their children, their family, and trying to be kind to ourselves and have compassion for ourselves for, the world we're living in right now.
Awesome. So I know you've been doing some cool stuff on social media and everything. So I know for people who want to hear more from Michelle, it's Michelle Roisman, Roisman, all one word, underscore therapy. And again, it's Michelle, Michelle underscore therapy. And I know you also have a website.
It is mroismantherapy.com.
There you go. So, guys, everybody who's out there listening, right, this whole idea of trauma having to be this big, crazy, massive thing that is catastrophic and life changing is, is not necessarily always the way it's going to show up. It could be a slow, steady build up, kind of like we've been going through in this pandemic. So, just want to have everybody out there be empowered from the words that Michelle and I were talking about tonight. The simplest thing you can do, exercise more and definitely meditate more. There's tons of good resources out there, right? There's Dr. Joe Dispenza and Tony Robbins and Deepak Chopra, right? There, you go on YouTube and just type in meditation for kids, meditate, right? And I'm sure stuff is gonna come up. I know, like I said, I'm a huge fan of the Muse headphone headbands. They actually are really cool to see what you're doing and how your meditations are going, and it's super super cool and really easy. And you can get one for the family, and everybody just downloads the app on a individual device, right? So if someone has an iPod, someone has an iPad, or whatever, you can use the same thing and just share it amongst the family, which I know one of my buddies does in his chiropractic office for all of his clients before they come in. They just, clean it off. So love to hear any questions you have. Obviously, you can reach either one of us very easily through the Family Room Wellness Associates, or again, you can find Michelle at her Instagram that we just listed a few minutes ago, as well as you guys can reach me as well on my Instagram. And Michelle, thank you again for talking about this really, really important and pertinent topic of what's going on in the world right now.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It was so great talking to you.